After 5 years, my fiancé said I wasn't pretty enough to marry. So I called off the wedding, chose myself, and found true happiness after escaping his cruel judgment. My hands are trembling as I stare at the text message that just shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The blue glow of my phone screen illuminates my face in the darkness of this coffee shop parking lot, casting shadows that feel somehow prophetic of the darkness about to engulf my carefully constructed world. This is Maria. I know you blocked Dominic. Can we meet tomorrow? There's more to the story that you should know. Maria. The name that has haunted my thoughts like a persistent ghost ever since Valerie, Dominic's mother, the woman who raised the man I thought I'd spend my life with, destroyed my world with three devastating words that still echo in my mind like a death sentence. He loves Maria. But let me back up, because to truly understand the magnitude of this betrayal, to comprehend how completely my universe has imploded in the span of a single week, you need to know how this story really began. Not with love and hope and promises of forever, but with a phone call that came exactly 15 minutes ago, cutting through the relative peace of my Monday evening like a knife through silk. I had been sitting in my car outside this very same coffee shop, trying to work up the courage to go inside and face whatever truth Valerie needed to share with me, when my phone rang with that familiar ringtone. Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, which Dominic had programmed as his mother's contact sound because he said she brought light into every room she entered. Margot, sweetheart. Valerie's voice had been thick with tears, the kind of crying that comes from deep in your chest, the kind that makes your whole body shake with the force of emotions too big to contain. I'd never heard Dominic's mother cry before, not once in the 5 years I'd known her. Through family dinners and holiday celebrations, through birthday parties and casual Sunday visits, through my engagement to her son, Valerie had always been the picture of composure, elegant, put together, the kind of woman who wore lipstick to the grocery store and never let anyone see her without her hair perfectly styled. Valerie? What's wrong? I'd asked, immediately thinking the worst. Had something happened to Dominic? An accident at the construction site where he worked. My heart had started racing with that familiar panic that comes when you suddenly realize how much you have to lose, how quickly everything you care about can be ripped away without warning. We need to talk, she'd said, her voice breaking on the last word like glass hitting concrete. About Dominic. About what he told me last night when he called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing like he was 12 years old again. There's something you need to know, something important, and I can't let him destroy your life the way his father destroyed mine. The comparison to Dominic's father had sent ice through my veins, freezing me from the inside out. Everyone in the family knew the story, how Michael had left when Dominic was 12, how he'd moved to Arizona with his secretary after 20 years of marriage, how he'd abandoned his family for what he claimed was a newer, better life. It was the wound that had shaped Dominic's entire view of relationships, the reason he'd always been so adamant about never becoming his father, the reason he'd proposed on that hiking trail with tears in his eyes, telling me that he wanted to be the kind of man who stayed. What do you mean? I'd whispered, but I think some part of me already knew. Deep down, in the place where we keep our worst fears locked away, I think I'd been waiting for this phone call for months. I can't do this over the phone, Valerie had said, her voice steady despite the tears I could hear in every syllable. Can you meet me? The coffee shop on Maple Street? The one near the park? I know it's late, but this can't wait. And so here I am, 15 minutes after that phone call ended, sitting in my Honda Civic in the nearly empty parking lot, watching Valerie through the coffee shop window as she waits for me with the patience of someone who knows she's about to deliver devastating news. She's chosen a corner booth, the kind that offers privacy for difficult conversations, the kind where secrets are shared and hearts are broken. Her usually perfect bob is disheveled, and even from this distance, I can see the tissue box on the table in front of her, evidence of the emotional storm we're both about to weather. My phone buzzes again with another text from Maria, as if she somehow knows I'm thinking about her, as if she can sense my turmoil from wherever she is in this city that suddenly feels too small to contain all of our complicated emotions. I know this is hard, but you deserve the truth. We all do. The truth. What a loaded, dangerous word. The truth is that I've been living in denial for months, making excuses for Dominic's growing emotional distance, his late nights with Paul, his sudden disinterest in our wedding plans. The truth is that last Friday night, when he told me he wasn't sure about marriage, about us, about everything we built together over 5 years, I'd actually been relieved that it was just cold feet and not something worse. The truth is that I've been so desperate to hold on to what we had that I've been willfully blind to what was right in front of me. But now, staring at Maria's text message, I realized there was something worse. There always is, isn't there? Just when you think you've hit rock bottom, life hands you a shovel and points toward the basement. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? To truly understand how devastating this moment is, to comprehend the full scope of what's about to be lost, you need to know how we got here. You need to know about the 5 years that led to this parking lot, this phone call, this moment when everything I believed about love and trust and forever began to crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. Dominic and I have been together for just over 5 years, engaged for the last 8 months. It seems impossible that such a significant chunk of my life, such a formative period of growth and love and shared dreams, could be reduced to those simple statistics. But numbers can't capture the texture of a relationship, can't convey the way two people become so intertwined that you forget where one of you ends and the other begins. We met through mutual friends at a housewarming party in Sarah's new apartment. Just two people in their early 20s hitting it off over a shared hatred of IPAs and an inexplicable love for 90s cartoons. I remember that night with the kind of clarity usually reserved for traumatic events or perfect moments. The way he laughed at my spot-on impression of Beavis and Butthead. How he offered to walk me to my car, even though it was only 2 blocks away through a perfectly safe neighborhood. The way my heart actually skipped a beat when he asked for my number with a kind of nervous energy that suggested this mattered to him. You know, he'd said, leaning against my beat-up Toyota Camry with that crooked smile that would become so familiar to me. I was dreading this party. Sarah's been trying to set me up with her cousin Jessica for months, and I came here prepared to make polite conversation for exactly 90 minutes, and then escape as soon as possible. And now? I'd asked, already knowing the answer from the way he was looking at me like I was something unexpected and wonderful that had wandered into his life. Now I'm thinking maybe Sarah knows what she's talking about after all. He'd grinned, and I'd felt that flutter in my stomach that romance novels write about, but you never quite believe until it happens to you. That moment when the universe shifts slightly on its axis, and you realize your life is about to change in ways you can't even imagine. Our relationship progressed at a comfortable pace that felt both inevitable and surprising. Like watching a sunrise you know is coming, but are still amazed by its beauty. We dated for a year, learning each other's quirks and habits with the kind of fascination that comes from genuine affection. I discovered that he sang off-key in the shower every morning, that he cried during Pixar movies, but tried to hide it, that he could spend entire Sundays in bed reading different books, but sharing the comfortable silence that only comes when two people are truly at ease with each other. Moving in together after 2 years felt natural, like the next logical step in a perfectly orchestrated dance. We'd been spending most nights together anyway, gradually accumulating each other's belongings until it was impossible to tell whose apartment we were actually in. The apartment we found was a second-floor walk-up in a converted Victorian, nothing fancy, but unmistakably ours from the moment we signed the lease. I remember the day we signed the lease so clearly, how official it felt, how grown-up. We'd spent the morning looking at 3 different places, each one more disappointing than the last, before our realtor showed us this gem. It had hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, windows that let in perfect morning light, and a kitchen just big enough for 2 people to cook together without constantly bumping into each other. Dominic had insisted on carrying me over the threshold, even though it was just a rental, even though we weren't married yet. Practice, he'd said, spinning me around in our empty living room while I laughed and told him he was ridiculous. I want to make sure I don't drop you on the actual wedding day. The wedding day. Even then, 2.5 years ago, it had felt like an inevitability rather than a hope. We were building something together, something solid and real and permanent. We adopted Beans when we'd been living together for a year on a rainy Saturday afternoon when we'd wandered into the animal shelter, just to look. The gray tabby had been languishing there for months, overlooked because he was already 3 years old and had what the volunteers diplomatically called socialization issues. But Dominic had taken one look at that grumpy, scarred face and fallen completely in love. He just needs someone to believe in him, he'd said, letting Beans sniff his fingers through the cage bars while the cat regarded him with suspicious green eyes. Look at those eyes. He's been hurt before, but he still wants to trust someone. He just needs to know he's not going to be abandoned again. I'd known in that moment, watching this man see potential in a damaged, difficult cat that no one else wanted, that I was going to marry him. It wasn't the proposal or the ring or any grand romantic gesture that sealed it for me. It was watching him choose to love something that had been discarded by others. The proposal came last summer on our 4th anniversary, during a Saturday morning hike to our favorite lookout point. It wasn't extravagant or elaborate. Dominic had never been one for grand gestures, but it was perfect in its simplicity, perfect in its complete understanding of who we were as a couple. We'd been sitting on our usual rock, sharing a thermos of coffee and watching the sunrise paint the valley below in shades of gold and amber, when he'd started fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Margot," he'd said, and there was something in his voice that made me turn to look at him properly. His hands were shaking as he pulled out the ring box, fumbling with it so badly that he almost dropped it twice. I know this isn't the most romantic spot, and I should probably be on one knee. And I definitely should have planned something better than hiking boots and day-old coffee, but, I'd prompted my heart, hammering so hard, I was sure he could hear it. But I can't wait anymore. I can't keep pretending I don't already know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night, and argue with you about what to watch on Netflix and take care of you when you're sick, and let you take care of me when I'm being impossible. He'd finally managed to open the box, revealing his simple solitaire that caught the morning light and threw tiny rainbows across my hands. Will you marry me? I'd said yes immediately, before he'd even finished the question, throwing my arms around his neck and nearly sending us both tumbling off the rock. The ring fit perfectly. He'd enlisted Lena's help to figure out my size, and for a moment, sitting there with the sunrise and the mountains and this man who knew exactly how to love me, everything felt absolutely right. We set the date for this October, choosing a weekend when the leaves would be changing and the weather would still be warm enough for an outdoor ceremony. I'd always dreamed of a fall wedding, and Dominic had been enthusiastic about everything in those early planning stages. He'd come with me to venue viewings, offering opinions on centerpieces and enthusiastically sampling cake flavors. We'd spent Sunday mornings in bed with wedding magazines spread across the comforter, debating the merits of string quartets versus acoustic guitars. But somewhere around 3 months ago, things started to shift in ways so subtle that I almost didn't notice them happening. The change was gradual, like watching a flower wilt. You don't see it happening in real time, but suddenly you look up and realize that something that was once vibrant and alive is now diminished, fading, dying by degrees. When I'd show him potential venues for our reception, his responses became less enthusiastic, more focused on practical concerns that felt like objections in disguise. That's a lot of money for just one day, he'd say, or do we really need to invite all those people? His tone wasn't mean or dismissive, just distant, like he was talking about someone else's wedding, someone else's life. I'd brushed it off as typical guy behavior, or maybe just budget anxiety. Wedding planning is stressful for everyone, I'd told myself. It's normal for the groom to be overwhelmed by all the decisions and details. Lena had assured me that her fiancé Josh had gone through the same thing before their wedding, suddenly becoming obsessed with the cost of everything and questioning whether they really needed professional photography. Then came the delayed responses to my texts about wedding planning. I'd send him options for caterers, complete with detailed menus and pricing, and he'd reply hours later with just "looks fine" or "whatever you want." When I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd say he was just busy at work. His construction company had taken on some big projects, he'd explain, and his boss was riding everyone hard to meet deadlines. It made sense. Dominic had always been dedicated to his job, sometimes coming home exhausted and covered in dust, mumbling about problem clients and supply delays. Construction was a demanding field, and the company he worked for wasn't known for being particularly understanding about work-life balance. But then, last month, he started going out more with his work friend Paul, and everything changed in ways that I couldn't explain away with job stress. Paul was one of those guys who seemed to view marriage as a trap, commitment as weakness, and settling down as giving up on life. Where before Dominic might have gone out with the guys once or twice a month, suddenly it was 2 or 3 times a week. And when he'd come home from these outings, he seemed different, distant, checking his phone more often, being less affectionate in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. I tried talking to my best friend Lena about it, desperate for reassurance that this was just normal pre-wedding behavior. Lena, ever practical, had suggested that maybe I was overthinking things, that wedding planning could make anyone anxious and withdrawn. Men process stress differently than we do, she'd said over coffee last Tuesday. Maybe he just needs some space with his friends to work through whatever he's feeling. But what if it's not just stress, I'd asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in the back of my mind. What if he's having second thoughts about us? Margot, Lena had said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. This is Dominic we're talking about. The man who carried you over the threshold of your rental apartment. The man who fell in love with a grumpy shelter cat because he thought it needed someone to believe in it. He's not having second thoughts about you. But sitting here now, staring at Maria's text message, I realized that Lena was wrong. Sometimes the people we trust most, the people we think we know better than anyone, are capable of surprising us in the worst possible ways. The first real crack in our foundation came last Friday night. I'd been feeling the distance between us for weeks, watching Dominic slip away like sand through my fingers, and I was desperate to reconnect. Lena had suggested a date night. Pre-wedding jitters, she'd said confidently. You just need quality time together. So I'd made reservations at this new Italian place downtown, put on a nice dress, a deep blue number that Dominic had always complimented. I'd even bought his favorite beer. thinking maybe we could share a drink before dinner. Remember what it felt like to just be us again. But the moment he walked through the door that Friday evening, I knew something was wrong. He looked distracted, checking his phone before he'd even said hello, barely noticing the dress or the effort I'd put into making the evening special. Hey, he'd said, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. Sorry, I'm late. Paul needed help moving equipment after work. Paul again. It was always Paul these days, but I'd forced a smile. No problem. I got us reservations at that Italian place on 5th Street. Oh, he'd paused, phone still in his hand. Tonight? I thought maybe we could just order pizza and watch Netflix. I'm pretty beat. Disappointment hit me like a physical blow, but I'd rallied. Come on, when's the last time we went out together? Just the two of us? He'd agreed, but reluctantly, and the entire evening felt forced. The restaurant was lovely, warm lighting, the smell of garlic and herbs, couples around us laughing and holding hands. But Dominic seemed to be somewhere else entirely, going through the motions while his mind was clearly occupied with other things. This place is nice, I'd said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. Look, they have that wine you liked from our anniversary dinner. He'd responded, scanning the menu without really seeing it. Yeah, it's fine. Fine. Everything was just fine these days. The venue options were fine. The catering menus were fine. Our relationship, apparently, was fine too. But fine felt like a death sentence. I tried to engage him in conversation about work, about his family, about anything that might spark genuine interaction. But his responses were monosyllabic, distracted. He kept checking his phone, claiming it was work-related, but I caught glimpses of text notifications that didn't look like they were from his boss. When our entrees arrived, I decided to bring up something I'd been excited about all week. So I was thinking about our honeymoon, I'd said with forced cheerfulness. I found this amazing bed and breakfast in Napa Valley. It's got this gorgeous view of the vineyards, and they do wine tastings every afternoon. Actually, he'd interrupted, setting down his fork with more force than necessary. I've been thinking about that. About all of this, really. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. What do you mean? He'd run his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, but never in this context. I mean, maybe we're rushing into this. The wedding, the honeymoon, all of it. Maybe we should slow down. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Around us, other couples continued their romantic dinners, oblivious to the fact that my world was quietly imploding at table 12. Slow down? I'd repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Dominic, we've been together for 5 years. We've been engaged for 8 months. How is that rushing? I don't know, he'd said, and there was something almost frantic in his voice. I've been talking to Paul about marriage, about how it changes things, and his brother went through this messy divorce last year, and I keep thinking about my dad. Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Don't you dare compare us to your father. Don't you dare use him as an excuse for whatever this is. It's not an excuse, he'd said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. It's just, what if we're not right for each other? What if we're just comfortable? And comfort isn't the same thing as love. The question felt like a slap. 5 years of building a life together, and he was questioning whether we were right for each other. Is that really what you think? I'd asked, my voice shaking. That we're just comfortable? That what we have isn't real? I don't know what I think anymore, he'd admitted. All I know is that I'm scared. I'm scared of making a mistake, of promising forever when forever seems impossible. We barely touched our food after that. I tried not to cause a scene, tried to keep my voice down and my terse in check, but inside I was falling apart. This was supposed to be our date night, our chance to reconnect, and instead it felt like watching our relationship die in real time. The ride home had been silent, thick with tension. At our apartment, he deflected any attempt at further conversation, claiming he was exhausted and needed time to think. He'd slept on the couch that night, the first time in our entire relationship that we'd gone to bed angry and apart. The next morning was painfully awkward. We moved around each other like strangers sharing an Airbnb, careful not to make eye contact, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The coffee maker seemed to mock us with its cheerful gurgling, a stark contrast to the funeral atmosphere that had settled over our kitchen. I'm meeting Paul and some work friends for lunch, he'd said around 11, not quite looking at me as he grabbed his keys. We're going to watch the game at the Rusty Nail. The Rusty Nail. The sports bar downtown where construction workers and college students went to drink cheap beer and yell at oversized televisions. Under normal circumstances, I might have made a joke about him choosing the greasiest wings in town over my homemade brunch. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I was too emotionally drained to argue. After he left, I spent an hour crying into Bean's fur while he purred sympathetically. Then I called Lena, who immediately offered to rescue me from my own apartment. Emergency coffee run, she declared when she picked me up. And possibly some retail therapy. Target is having a sale. We'd spent the afternoon wandering the aisles of Target, me unloading everything about the disastrous date night while she listened patiently. By early evening, I'd felt calmer and decided to head home with a plan. I'd talked to Dominic calmly and rationally. We'd figure this out together, like we always did. I was pulling into our apartment complex when my phone buzzed with a text from Kyler, one of Dominic's coworkers. Hey Margot, are you okay? Things got kind of weird at the bar today. Just wanted to check in. Message sent a chill down my spine. I called him instead of texting back. Kyler? It's Margot. What happened at the bar? He sounded uncomfortable, reluctant to share details. The guys were giving Dominic a hard time about the wedding. You know how they get when they've been drinking. Paul was asking him if he was ready to be tied down to one woman forever. My heart was already sinking. And what did Dominic say? He said he was having doubts about the timing, about whether he was ready. And then Paul asked what was holding him back, and he paused. Dominic was pretty drunk. He said something like if you were prettier, he'd be more excited about marrying you. Then he laughed it off like it was a joke. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, my hand flying to my chest. I sat there in my car, trying to process what I'd just heard. Look, me and some of the other guys called him out for it. Kyler continued. We told him that was fucked up, but he just got defensive and said we couldn't take a joke. A joke. He'd used my appearance as the punchline to a cruel joke in front of his friends. The man who was supposed to love me unconditionally had reduced our entire relationship to my perceived physical shortcomings. Thank you for telling me, I'd said. I have to go. I'd hung up and sat in my car crying for 20 minutes. When I finally went inside, I found Dominic passed out on the couch, still in his clothes, reeking of stale beer. I'd taken Beans into the bedroom with me and locked the door. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I couldn't pretend this hadn't happened. Sunday morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, Dominic's standard apology breakfast. When I confronted him about what Kyler had told me, his face fell completely. It was just guy talk, he said, not meeting my eyes. You know how Paul gets. I just said something dumb to shut him up. You used my appearance as a punchline, I said, my voice shaking. You told a bar full of people that I'm not pretty enough to marry. I didn't mean it, he said quickly. You're beautiful, Margot. I was just drunk and saying stupid things, but the damage was done. We argued for over an hour, going in circles. I need space, I finally said, grabbing my purse and keys. I can't be here right now. I drove straight to Elliot's place. When I told him what happened, he was furious, ready to confront Dominic directly. Throughout Sunday, Dominic kept texting apologies. I responded only once, saying I needed time. I called in sick to work on Monday, unable to face answering phones at the dental office while pretending everything was fine. That's when Valerie called. And that brings us back to now, to this moment in the coffee shop parking lot, knowing that whatever Valerie tells me will change everything. I take a deep breath and walk toward the coffee shop entrance. Valerie looks up as I approach, her face a map of worry and regret. Margot, sweetheart, she says, standing to hug me. What did you need to tell me? I ask, sliding into the booth across from her. Valerie looks down at her hands, then back up at me with tears in her eyes. Dominic called me Sunday night. He was falling apart. Told me about the fight, about what he said at the bar. But there's more. There's something he's been hiding from you. My heart stops. What? There's a woman at his work. Maria. She started a few months ago, and Valerie's voice breaks. He's developed feelings for her. The words hit me like a physical blow. Maria. The name from the text message makes perfect sense now. All the late nights, all the phone checking, all the distance and disinterest in our wedding plans. He's been emotionally cheating. Has he? I can barely get the words out. Have they? No, Valerie says quickly. Nothing physical happened, but emotionally. He's been confused. He says he loves you, but he's also attracted to her. I sit there, processing this. Everything makes sense now. The distance, the phone checking, the disinterest in our wedding plans. Why are you telling me this? I ask. Valerie's eyes well up. Because I lived through this with his father. The emotional distance, the manufactured arguments, the cruel comments designed to push me away. Michael did the same thing before he left for Arizona. I won't watch my son destroy a good woman the way his father destroyed me. Over the next few days, everything unravels quickly. I meet with Maria, who turns out to be as confused as I am. She had no idea Dominic had feelings for her, and shows me their text exchanges, completely professional, nothing romantic. She explains that Paul had been stirring things up at work, encouraging Dominic to explore his options before settling down. The family meeting at Karina's apartment is excruciating but necessary. With Valerie, Karina, Paul, and Dominic all present, the truth finally comes out. Paul's toxic influence, Dominic's fears about becoming his father, and his emotional confusion about Maria. But by then, the damage is too deep. I think we need to call off the wedding, I say quietly during that dinner, and the room goes silent. Dominic protests, says he's certain about loving me, just scared of messing everything up. But I point out that he already has. The trust is broken, the foundation cracked beyond repair. The practical dissolution is almost harder than the emotional one. Canceling vendors, contacting guests, dividing our shared life into his and mine. The venue keeps our $8,000 deposit. The engagement ring goes into my dresser drawer where it still sits. 3 months later, I'm writing this from my new apartment, a smaller place across town with a tiny balcony where I grow herbs. Dominic moved out quickly, staying with his cousin. We've spoken a few times about practical matters, mail, shared accounts, returning borrowed items. The biggest surprise has been maintaining relationships with his family. Valerie texts me weekly, usually sending funny memes or updates about her garden, treating me like the daughter she never had. Karina and I have breakfast every other Sunday at this little diner halfway between our apartments, carefully avoiding the topic of her brother, but maintaining a friendship that means more to me than I expected. Sometimes we talk about books we're reading, sometimes about her job at the marketing firm, sometimes just about life in general. It's strange how losing one relationship can sometimes strengthen others who didn't even know were important. They've made it clear that I'm still family to them, regardless of what happened with Dominic. Blood doesn't make family, Valerie told me last week over coffee, her voice firm with conviction. Love and loyalty do. And you've shown more of both than my son did. The unconditional support from his family has been both healing and complicated. Part of me feels guilty for maintaining these relationships, like I'm somehow betraying Dominic or making his life more difficult. But a bigger part of me recognizes that these connections exist independently of my relationship with him. Maria requested a transfer to avoid awkwardness, and according to the office gossip Karina occasionally shares, things got uncomfortable for everyone involved once the full situation came to light. I actually feel sorry for her. She was just as much a victim in Paul's manipulations as I was, caught up in someone else's toxic games without her knowledge or consent. Paul, unsurprisingly, sent a non-apology about how these things happen for a reason and how I'd find someone better suited eventually. The message was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive pseudo-wisdom, full of platitudes that managed to be both condescending and completely unhelpful. I deleted it without responding, understanding finally that some people exist only to create chaos in other people's lives. As for me, I'm learning to be comfortable in my own company. Some days I feel liberated, relieved that I didn't marry someone who could doubt me so fundamentally. Other days, usually when my hot water heater acts up, I miss the practical comforts of partnership. I've started therapy to understand how I ignored so many red flags, how much of myself I had compromised to make room for Dominic's needs and insecurities. Dr. Martinez has been invaluable in helping me see patterns I didn't recognize while I was living them. You spent so much energy being the perfect girlfriend that you forgot to ask whether he was being a good partner to you, she told me during one of our sessions. The observation hit me like a revelation. How many of my own opinions had I swallowed to avoid conflict? How many times had I chosen his preferences over mine to keep the peace? How many dreams had I quietly set aside because they didn't align with his vision of our future? I've started a gratitude journal, something that seemed impossibly cheesy when Dr. Martinez first suggested it, but it's become surprisingly meaningful. Every morning, I write down 3 things I'm grateful for, and it's remarkable how this small practice has shifted my perspective from what I've lost to what I've gained. Yesterday I wrote, grateful for the freedom to choose my own coffee flavor, for beans purring when I'm sad, and for the courage to take a solo vacation. I've resumed hiking on Saturday mornings, something I'd stopped doing because Dominic complained about early weekend wake-ups and preferred to spend mornings in bed scrolling through his phone. Now I wake up at 6, make a travel mug of coffee, and drive to different trails around the city, exploring places I'd wanted to visit but never suggested because I knew he wouldn't be interested. The solitude on those morning hikes has become sacred to me. There's something about being alone in nature, about setting my own pace and stopping wherever I want for as long as I want, that feels like reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. The most unexpected development came from canceling our honeymoon. Instead of losing the deposit, I decided to take the trip alone. 10 days at a coastal cottage meant for 2. The idea terrified me at first. 10 days alone in a cottage designed for romance seemed like the setup for the world's most depressing indie film. I imagined myself rattling around in a space meant for couples, eating lobster alone, while couples around me celebrated anniversaries and engagements. But the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. I could wake up when I wanted, explore without negotiating, read an entire book in one sitting if I felt like it. I could eat ice cream for breakfast, and take naps in the afternoon, and spend hours photographing tide pools without anyone getting impatient. Next week, I'll be there with 3 paperbacks, downloaded podcasts about Maine's maritime history, and some overpriced skincare products that I chose entirely for comfort rather than how they might look to someone else. I've researched whale watching tours and lighthouse hikes, made reservations at restaurants I want to try, planned museum visits based entirely on my own interests. The cottage rental agency was surprisingly understanding when I explained the situation. Happens more than you'd think. The woman on the phone told me with the weary wisdom of someone who's seen every possible variation of human drama. We had a woman last year who took her honeymoon to Paris by herself after her fiancé ran off with her maid of honor. Sent us postcards from every museum in the city. Said it was the best trip of her life. Sometimes our song comes on the radio, and I feel a slight twinge, like pressing on a bruise that's mostly healed. Progress, not perfection. I'm not pretending I have everything figured out. My new apartment shower has mysterious temperature fluctuations. I killed another basil plant yesterday, and I still occasionally reach for my phone to text Dominic about something funny before remembering we don't do that anymore. But I'm learning that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering who someone really is before you legally bind yourself to them. Sometimes love isn't enough when it comes with conditions and cruel jokes and emotional affairs. My phone buzzes with another text from Maria. Hope you find peace with whatever you decide. I look at it for a moment, then delete it. Some chapters need to close completely before new ones can begin. And as I sit here in this coffee shop parking lot, finally understanding the full scope of what I've lost and what I've escaped, I realize that maybe that's exactly what's happening. The past 3 months have been a strange mixture of grief and relief, of mourning the future I'd planned while slowly discovering who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect girlfriend. Moving to this new apartment was both practical necessity and emotional rebirth. I couldn't afford the old place on my own, but more importantly, I couldn't bear to stay somewhere that held so many memories of us. Every corner of that old apartment contained some reminder of our life together. The spot where we'd hung our first piece of art together, the kitchen where he'd made me breakfast every Sunday morning, the bedroom where we planned our future and dreamed our shared dreams. This new place is smaller, quirkier, with quirks that would have driven Dominic crazy, but that I find charming. The bathroom door sticks, the kitchen faucet has to be turned just right, and the upstairs neighbors seem to rearrange their furniture at 3 in the morning. But it's mine in a way that the old apartment never quite was. The financial adjustment has been harder than I expected. Our shared expenses were suddenly all on me. Car insurance, streaming services, even groceries seem more expensive when you're cooking for one. I've become that person who uses coupons and buys store brands, who tracks expenses in a spreadsheet and thinks twice before ordering takeout. It's humbling, but also oddly empowering to know that I can take care of myself completely. The wedding vendors were surprisingly understanding when I started making those awful phone calls. The venue kept our deposit, but the florist refunded half our payment despite their no-refund policy. The DJ recommended his brother, who works at a therapy center, an unexpected but thoughtful gesture. Each conversation was like a small death, another piece of our shared future crumbling away, but also strangely liberating. With each person I told, the reality became more concrete, more final. Social media was its own special hell. I waited 2 weeks before changing my relationship status, dreading the flood of questions. When I finally did it at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, the notifications poured in anyway. Well-meaning friends with their "what happened" messages, distant relatives offering prayers, former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly sliding into my DMs with faux concern that felt more like curiosity. The most challenging part has been learning to fill the silence. 5 years of coupledom had made me forget what it felt like to make decisions based solely on my own preferences, to plan weekends around my own interests, to discover what I actually like when I'm not constantly considering someone else's opinions. I can watch terrible reality TV without judgment, eat cereal for dinner if I feel like it, spend entire Saturdays reading without having to check in with anyone. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, has helped me see patterns I didn't recognize while I was living them. You spent so much energy being the perfect girlfriend that you forgot to ask whether he was being a good partner to you, she told me during one of our sessions. The observation hit me like a revelation. How many of my own opinions had I swallowed to avoid conflict? How many times had I chosen his preferences over mine to keep the peace? I've started a gratitude journal, something that seemed impossibly cheesy when Dr. Martinez first suggested it, but has become surprisingly meaningful. Every morning, I write down 3 things I'm grateful for, and it's remarkable how this small practice has shifted my perspective. Yesterday, I wrote, grateful for the freedom to choose my own coffee flavor, for beans purring when I'm sad, and for the courage to take a solo vacation. The solo honeymoon trip is happening next week, and I'm alternating between excitement and terror. I've never traveled alone before, never had to navigate a new place without someone to share the decisions and split the costs. But I've researched whale watching tours and lighthouse hikes, made reservations at restaurants I want to try, planned museum visits based entirely on my own interests. My mother still thinks I'm crazy, but Karina has been incredibly supportive, even helping me shop for a new suitcase and travel-sized everything. Some mornings I wake up feeling strong and independent, grateful for my freedom, and excited about possibilities I couldn't see when I was part of a couple. Other mornings, I'm blindsided by grief for the future I'd planned, for the life that seemed so certain just a few months ago. The triggers are unpredictable. A couple holding hands at the grocery store, finding one of Dominic's socks behind the dryer, seeing a commercial for the venue where we were supposed to get married. But the pain is different now. Less sharp, more manageable. Like an old injury that aches when the weather changes but doesn't prevent you from going about your daily life. Progress, not perfection, as Dr. Martinez likes to remind me. I've reconnected with parts of myself that got lost somewhere along the way. I'm hiking again, reading voraciously, taking photographs of things that catch my eye without worrying about how long I'm taking or whether someone else is getting impatient. I've signed up for a pottery class that starts next month, something I'd always wanted to try, but never suggested because Dominic thought art classes were pretentious. The relationship with Dominic's family has been one of the most unexpected gifts of this whole mess. Valerie treats me like the daughter she never had, sending me articles about single women traveling and recipes she thinks I'd like. Karina has become a genuine friend, someone I can talk to about everything except her brother. They've made it clear that I'm still family to them, that what happened between Dominic and me doesn't change their love for me. Blood doesn't make family, Valerie told me last week over coffee. Love and loyalty do. And you've shown more of both than my son did. As for Dominic himself, I've heard through Karina that he's still living with his cousin, still working at the same company. Maria transferred to a different department, and according to the office gossip, things got awkward between them once the full situation came to light. I actually feel sorry for her. She was just as much a victim in Paul's manipulations as I was. Paul, predictably, has faded back into whatever toxic corner of the world spawned him. Karina mentioned that he and Dominic had some kind of falling out, though she didn't know the details. I don't particularly care. Some people exist only to create chaos in other people's lives, and the best thing you can do is minimize their impact and move on. The other day, I was grocery shopping when our song came on over the store speakers. 3 months ago, it would have sent me hiding in the frozen food section, fighting back tears. This time, I just felt that familiar twinge, like pressing on a mostly healed bruise, and then I kept shopping for ingredients for a recipe I wanted to try, something complicated and ambitious that I'd never attempted before because Dominic preferred simple food. I made that dish, a Moroccan tagine with preserved lemons and olives, and it was delicious. I ate it while reading a book about marine biology, with jazz playing in the background and candles lit for no reason other than that I like how they make the apartment feel. It was one of those perfect moments of solitude that reminds you being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely. My phone buzzes one more time as I prepare to finally go into the coffee shop and face whatever truth Valerie has been carrying. It's a text from my brother. Proud of you for doing this. Call me after if you need to talk. I smile despite everything. Elliot has been my rock through all of this. Never once saying, I told you so, even though he'd apparently had reservations about Dominic that he'd kept to himself for years. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when your world falls apart. I put my phone away, take one last look at my engagement ring, catching the streetlight, and walk toward whatever comes next. For the first time in months, I'm not afraid of the uncertainty. I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm not afraid of starting over. Sometimes the end of something terrible is actually the beginning of something wonderful, even if you can't see it yet. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you saves you from something even worse. As I push open the door to the coffee shop, I realize that Maria was right about one thing. I do deserve the truth. I deserve someone who thinks I'm beautiful enough to marry without hesitation. I deserve someone who doesn't question whether I'm worth their excitement. I deserve someone who chooses me every day, not just when it's convenient. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is me. Maybe learning to choose myself, to value myself, to be excited about my own life is the most important relationship work I'll ever do. Maybe this conversation with Valerie, this painful unraveling of everything I thought I knew about love, is exactly what I need to become the person I'm meant to be. The future stretches out before me now, uncertain, but full of promise. No shared calendar to consult, no one else's preferences to consider, no compromises to make except the ones I choose for myself. It's terrifying and exhilarating and completely mine. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, that feels like more than enough. It feels like everything